Hello, this is Mark Tucker,
And this is Alan Furstenberg, and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, welcome back, Alan. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as always, Mark. How's your week going?
It's going just fine. Things are moving right along. Something I've dug into quite a bit lately is Alexa presentation language, and I know that people might have some questions about that. What is it, and kind of how that fits. And I know that you're interested in templating, so I thought this would be a topic that we could just kind of explore together. Not go too deep, but just kind of cover some of the basics, give people a good foundation on what it is and kind of how it works behind the scenes.
Sure, it's always good. I mean, I know a few weeks back you started talking about code execution with APL, and it was just blowing my mind. I really was having trouble wrapping my head around it. And we've talked a number of times about APL and kind of how APL fits into the broad scheme of how it works with skills. But I definitely think it's good if we kind of, touch base again with an overview and kind of start looking at some of the different components that APL can have.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of at a really high level, in order to get an APL document to show up on a screen, then there is a directive that gets passed as part of the response. So, there's a JSON response that comes back, and you can specify what the text is and what the reprompt is going to be. And you can also pass in an APL document. And part of that APL document could also include like a data document. So you separate the structure of what you want on the screen from the actual data. And then, what I do a lot of the times is just have the template on the file system on my project for the screen. And I also actually a lot of times just have a dummy data document that I can just load up like an apl.ninja or something like that, and just see what the things look like.
So already I've got questions just to make sure I have everything set in my head. So when we talk about an APL document, I know this is a JSON file. It's a JSON data structure, a single JSON object, right?
That's correct.
Now, let me make sure I get this right. We can send it back in one of two ways. We can either provide that JSON object directly as part of the directive.
Correct.
Or we can specify a file that has the JSON in it. And here's where I'm a little less certain.
Oh, so there actually is a way where you could host actually on, up in the cloud as part of the Alexa developer console experience. You could host this APL document and then just refer to it by name. But when I say file, I just include the JSON file as part of my my code in the file system.
Okay.
And then I just use a require tag to, in essence, pull that in, and I get the whole JSON inside my code, and I just flop that into the directive.
So even if you have a JSON file, you're loading the JSON file into your skill first, is usually how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the data object is, again, another JSON object. And this one, I assume, is just, since you're mostly developing in JavaScript, you're just building a JavaScript object, right?
Yep, exactly.
And you pass that as the data for the directive, as part of the directive, correct? Okay.
Correct, yeah. So you can build it up from scratch. It could be like the result of an API. You could just do the whole response back from an API call and have that be the document, or you might want to wrap that with some things or pare it down so only the properties that you're going to display are returned. You've got a size limit on that response that you're coming back.
Okay.
And so if you're passing the whole APL document as, and it's pretty complicated, or you're passing a lot of data, then you're going to get into trouble. But as long as you keep things fairly small, then you're in good shape with that.
And again, as you say, this data object really can be, have any structure to it that you want. So it can have a number of properties, and some of those properties can be arrays or can be objects themselves, and nested to some level. I won't say whatever level, because there's a certain practical limit, but it can be fairly complicated if you want.
Yeah, and then it's kind of your decision, like if you're going to say this template, if you're only doing it for one language, then it doesn't really matter. You can just hard code like the names of buttons or headers or things like that right in the APL document yourself, or you can choose to say, well, I'm going to pass in any of the text that's going to display on the screen as part of my data document, and then you could adjust it based on what language, and have something else, a content management system or something, pull out those names for the screen. So then when it's displayed, then it's in whatever language you want it to be in. So you've got some options there, a little flexibility.
Okay, so broadly speaking, we're using directives to send back two data structures. One contains our layout and one contains the data.
Exactly.
Okay. So take it from there.
All right. So now the document that is your APL, docket, like the visual structure of what's going to be on your screen, there is a root object. And I'm simplifying quite a bit actually, but there's something where you finally get to a section that's called main template. And that is, representative of your screen. So whatever you want to display on your screen, and I'm going to introduce just a few basic components. So there are some building blocks or components that are built right into APL. Plus there's the ability to import in additional component libraries, so to speak. And then you get some additional things like Alexa buttons or, full-fledged screens. So there's, but we'll I think leave it to the basic components today.
One quick question about components.
All right.
Who can specify components? Is it just Alexa that can specify components, or are there outside libraries of components?
So there are outside libraries, or could be outside libraries. So Amazon provides a few libraries. One that's all specific to like viewport sizes, and you can use that to help you figure out like what screen it is, because there's lots of different devices and they have different heights and widths and different dots per inch and things like that. So there's one library you can do that. One is all about styles, about, I want to have a light theme versus a dark theme, and there's some styles. And then there's something called layout, which gives you some additional things. But there's another part of the document which is called layouts. And you can either choose, like if you are showing something on the screen and you're repeating something multiple times, you could take that thing that you're repeating and move that into a separate thing called a component, into a layout section, give it a name. And so now you've just created your own component. Okay. And so what you can do then is you can use in that same document now your component and just set properties on your component. And so now you make a change in one place and it's reflected everywhere that component's used.
Okay. Okay. So that's good for templating like stuff. I know one of the things, on, the equivalent on the HTML side would be like custom tags, for example, which some libraries let you build these days. And you now create these tag libraries.
Right.
I know one of the things that you've been working on recently were adding badges to some of your components. Did you do that using a component library? So you now have a badge component library?
So what I ended up doing, and there's a sample out on apl.ninja that you can dive into, but what I did is I set up on my screen some samples of some things like a regular Alexa button, an icon button, just a frame, which is a component that you can paint the background and border on, or a vector graphic. And then just using those components that Amazon provides already, I created a component called the badge wrapper. So, and then you can actually go to the layout section of that one document and see the code for the badge wrapper. But then you go back into the main template section and say, instead of just this button, I'm going to have that button be a child of this badge wrapper component that I created. You can set some properties on the badge wrapper saying this is the position of where the badge is going to be, the background color, the border color, the font size, and what the value is going to be that's going to show inside the badge, and that it just renders it out. So I could then go to the next step, and this is what like Amazon's done, and is that I could take that stuff that made up that component, move it into a separate file. So the only thing that's in there is the stuff about badge wrapper. And then I could host that on the internet someplace, some public, like CDN or something. It's just a JSON file that's being hosted. And then there's a certain way that you can take that URL that makes up that, find that JSON file, and you could then import that in. So then you could, there's not really a good way to do that, like Cloudflare or other places that have done that for, JavaScript or for CSS stuff but yeah, it's going in that direction. There will be a day where you will be able to find these different component libraries and import components in. Yes.
Okay. Now, you touched on something a moment ago that I kind of know is at the heart of it. So I guess I'm cheating a little bit. But you said, as part of the wrapper, you specify what the value is that you want to show in the badge. Now, presumably, this is a data that you get from the data object that you're sending in. How do you marry the two?
All right, so that's through data binding.
Okay.
So you can say at the root level, this document is going to data bind, because there's the document that you return back as part of the directive is like, there is the JSON document that is the directive. One of the properties is the APL document, and another one of the properties is the data object. So really it's all just one JSON together. So what you're saying, then they're already paired up already. Okay. So you just have to, in the APL template, saying, I'm going to pass in a parameter, which is going to be, you give it some name, and then you can start using that name dot whatever property, or even array syntax, or things like that you need to incorporate those things into. Now, when you define your own component, you can specify these are parameters that this component accepts. And so one of the things, those would be like the badge text. And so now my main template has defined a badge wrapper, and that has a property on there that's called badge text. And so now I use the special data evaluation syntax to say this, I'm going to set this property either with a hard-coded string, or I'm going to set it with the value from the data document. So
how do you specify that I assume the hard-coded string is you just give it a straight value.
Just a string value. So
right.
Yeah, so the special syntax for templates in APL is a $sign and curly braces inside of a string.
That's pretty standard.
Fairly standard. So now you can use just property syntax. So let's say that I named my data document payload. So I could say payload dot property one, and it would just read that value, put it in that document as if it was hard coded in there, and when it renders, it's going to render the value from the data document. But you can do other things. You can check for conditionals. You could do like a ternary operator.
Okay.
And like comparison. So you can start doing, and there's not tons, but there's a math functions object and a string functions object. And so there's different things that you can use to do calculations or do tests on things. So like maybe there's a data property in your data object that is visible for something. And so maybe your screen has a button bar at the bottom that you want to hide or show, depending on that the value of that is visible. You just have to go to the parent component that represents the top level of that footer or that button bar area. And you just have to check, you go to the display property, and you would do a ternary operator saying, this property dot is visible. And then in single quotes, it would be like, if it's visible, then it would be normal, colon, if it's not visible, it would be none. So then or you can do invisible, because one makes the whole space go away, like the component doesn't even exist. The other one is like, I'm still taking up space, but the whole thing's invisible.
That's very CSS-like.
Yeah, there is a number of CSS stuff. And so the base object that you're going to define in your template is a container component. And a container component is all about layout. It's based off of Flexbox, which is kind of a newer way of doing some CSS stuff. And so you can define like the whole width and height of your screen is going to be what's available. But then you can say, oh, I have this container is going to have some child components. And it could be, things like a text component, which is, has a property to say, this is the text that I'm going to show, or a frame component, which says I'm going to do a background color and a border color and a border radius. And then you can do things like laying things out. So you can lay things one on top of the other, or like on the frame component, like on the badge. It's got a number of container components.
So you've got a Z order to it as well, if you want.
Kind of. It's not as good as a Z order because you can't really specify that. But
you can't specify a Z order. Okay.
You can't specify a Z order, but you can say, because what it will normally do is like if something's got children, you're going to lay it out either in rows or columns based on Flexbox. But you could say, oh, I want to take this first one and I want to position it absolutely. So that actually snaps it to a layer that's underneath the other things that lay on top of it. And that would be like how you get a background image or a background color on your screen. So you can play around with these different properties, and then like on a frame, you can have a child component of a text, and that's how I get the badge is just a frame with a child text component.
So, okay. So what sorts of components are there? I mean, I can, from your description, I get the fact that there are layout components, and we've kind of talked about button components and just general frame that contains text components. What other components are there that that Amazon defines?
Yeah, there's a couple of dozen. So like when it comes to like the very basic building blocks that are built in, you've got container. You have an edit text, which I haven't used. I'm assuming that's like an input box, a frame, grid sequence. So that can allow lay things out.
A grid layout, like
kind of in a gray grid, an image, a pager control. So you can have like a whole screen and then swipe and, page 2, swipe page 3. A sequence is just ability to lay one thing right after another. And there's some special case, like a scroll view. And what I do is a lot of times is that if I import another library for Alexa layout, I've got an Alexa header control that gives me my basic header in the top left, image in the top right, ability to have a back button, and then like a footer, which would be like if you wanted to have a, try and give like a hint text of what you could say, like Alexa, open, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes I create my own button bar at the bottom. And so then that middle section, because you have all kinds of different sizes, like your Echo Show 5 is going to be, kind of short, whereas your Echo Show 8 or 10 is going to be, a lot more vertical space. You have to kind of keep those things in mind. And so what I do a lot of times is I use a scroll view component. So I basically can just like specify things one right after the other in the container, and then it's going to clip it at where the footer and the header is, and I can just scroll up and down or use the voice and intent for like scroll down, scroll up.
Now, what you have in there, you mentioned a list component. So I assume you'd put the list component inside the scroll component, and in the list component, you'd give it like an array of stuff. And it would iterate automatically through that array component, and each component in there, it would render would render that the same way.
Yeah.
So
so a scroll view is going to be more if you just want text and things, but like a sequence itself. Trying to think of what else would be on the sequence, but that would be the thing. Like if you wanted to have a list of things that repeated and looked the same, you can do that. But there's also the container itself is kind of funny because you can at the container level, because it's a control that can lay out multiple children. You can at the container level, you can say I want a data bind to the property which is the array in my data. And then you can specify with a single item, like another container, which then maybe contains like a couple of texts and stuff laid out in a row. So you can say this is like a template of what one of those things would look like. And the container just handles it because it's data
It does the
bindable.
iterating itself.
Yeah, so container could do that yourself. You get some additional things with sequence. There's also like a first item and last item. So you could have the first one or the last item look a little bit different. So like you could do like a header for the first one or something, you know.
Or, separator bars in between everything except for after all of them, except for the last one.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's a separate like divider component that you can use. That's not actually part of the base components. You actually have to import a library to get divider.
Interesting. How would you do something now? This is a very common thing to do on list-like things is, if you've got list of, one-line items, every other item would be in a different color. You'd have a different background color to make it easier to kind of focus on a line. How would you do that sort of thing?
All right. So there is a numbered property that you can set on the parent.
Okay.
So then each of the children gets an ordinal number. And so it's like it takes whatever the data was that you passed it, and it just adds some additional things to it. One of them is ordinal. So you could actually data bind to ordinal, and you would see 1, 2, 3, 4.
And then you do
so then you could do
modulo math on that.
A little math to see if it's odd or even to change that.
Very good. Okay.
So a few other ones. There's a touch wrapper. So interestingly, the button component is in a separate library, but like a button would really be made up of a touch wrapper, a frame or two, and some text.
I can see
so
that.
Those are like so those are the basic components. But a touch wrapper, you can wrap around a frame, you can wrap around an image, you can wrap around some text. And so then you can, that allows it to be touchable. So when you touch it on the screen, then you get the ability to do an event, and you can execute a command either locally on the device or send it up to the cloud so that the skill gets a user event that specifies some data. So then, from the skill level, you can process some things and do some additional stuff. And then there's a special vector graphic. So
which we've talked about a few times now.
Yeah, so you can specify an image and get like a source URL to like a JPEG or a ping, but you can't use an SVG there. If you want an SVG, you actually have to actually take the SVG, convert it to Alexa Vector Graphic, AVG, which is a subset of SVG, which puts it instead of XML format, which the SVG is, into a JSON format, which is what the AVG is. And then you can go ahead and define that. There's a graphics section inside of your document where you can define each of your vector graphics as far as the paths and stuff. And then you can reference it with a vector graphic image.
Okay.
So yeah, there's lots we could dive into it more. There's more to talk about commands and stuff.
And we will. No, I don't want to get into commands tonight because that's just going to blow my mind again. We will have to save that for another time.
But basically, it's templating. There's commands. You can do data binding, and you can do these, expression syntax things where you can, test properties and set values, and so those are kind of the main things to get you going on what it is. And just remember, everything's JSON.
So if we've got, so the first big thing is if people have questions about APL, where is the best place to go? The
best place to go, seriously, is apl.ninja. It's a website like a CodePen or a JSBin or something that you might have used doing your JavaScript or web programming, but it's all about APL. And you can create an account. It's free. You can look around at what other people have done. You can take a look at their projects. You can fork it and create do your own thing. You can publish things privately, or you can do it publicly. You can pass around URLs. There's just all kinds of things that Alexander Martin has done with that site to be great. And to be honest, a couple of months ago, I didn't really know that much about APL, and that site has helped quite a bit.
So fantastic. Lots of reference documentation there as well.
Yep.
So it's great following apl.ninja on Twitter, because every so often they post, new screens that they've been working with and demonstrating. So it's fun to see. and just in general, I would love to see what people are doing with APL and great ways that you're using it, or the questions that you have.
Yep, definitely. It's lots of fun things, like you say. There, people are doing things with like video in the background, and then layering stuff over top of it, or animations. There's just all kinds of fun stuff that you can learn and just play around with. And a lot of times, one of the ways that I learn best is just by taking something and then start tweaking it and seeing what that little change does, and then you start to grab it. So, yeah, I'd love to hear. You can always post something on social media with a link to apl.ninja and say, hey, check this out. Would love to take a look, and willing to help where I can.
Yeah. Always, always, if you have questions, feel free to share, because if we don't know it, we can find people who do.
Yeah, there's definitely other people that know APL quite a bit more than I do, but just jump in and start learning. And we will catch you on another episode of Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Have a great week, Mark.
Yeah, you too. Take care, Alan. Take care, everybody.